Hey, welcome back. It's Louisa Munson from, I was going to say Feel Good Astrology, but also the Barefoot broadcast. And this is one of the Feel Good conversations. And it's one of my favorite video activities because I get to chat with really, really cool people who are doing great stuff in the world and who really make a difference. I can already see I've got people sat in the chat room. So please do feel free just to say hello, let us know where you're from. And also if you've got any questions for my amazing guest, I'm just going to I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and also bring her onto the screen in just a second. As you can see, her name is just below. Her name is Heidi Gessner. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest. So Heidi, I met her earlier this year, maybe at the end of last year. We're part of a joint community that is a Tom Evans community known as Soul Waves. He's an author and he's somebody that we've done quite a few interviews and chats and things about consciousness. And my guest today, Heidi, she's got a really interesting perspective. She's an ordained United Church of Christ minister. She was a former end-of-life chaplain, really for 20 years supporting people on their journeys of grief. And so she's got quite an interesting perspective, spending time around people who are coming to the end of their life and noticing what they need, noticing changes in consciousness. So it's really a big role, obviously. And obviously she gets to also spend times with the loved ones and to see what goes on. Now, Heidi has just recently brought out a book, which we'll be talking about throughout this show. It's called Pockets of Grace, and I definitely want to ask her about it. But I'm really bringing her in because I want to talk really about the massive shift in consciousness that we've all gone through in these last few years. And as I see it, there's been quite a big movement in terms of grief, whether we've actually lost people or whether we've lost a certain innocence in our life and we're grieving for something that no longer exists. So she's my expert today. Let's bring her on, shall we? Oh, Heidi, it's so nice to have you on screen with me. How are you today?
I'm good. It's so good to be with you, Louisa. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. It's taken a while to organize. I've been very, very slow. And you released your book earlier this year, didn't you? When did you release it?
Just in April, just this spring in April, it came out. So it's been a few months. And yeah, it's exciting to talk about it and get it out in the world and get some feedback about it. It seems like people are wanting something, some spiritual sustenance, some touchstones that can help maybe give some breadcrumbs about how we move forward now as we're kind of in this post-pandemic phase. I guess we are,
Yeah, well, who knows? I mean,
who knows, right?
I saw a news piece today suggesting that there was a new pandemic coming up across Europe at the moment. I was like, okay, here we go. It's going to bring up so many issues because, not only have we been dealing with things to do with grief, but there's been, I think, quite a big piece about belonging. Like, who do we belong to? Where do we belong? Where do we fit in? And what's sacred, all sorts of different things. I can see we've got some people in and a couple of comments that I just want to put onto the screen because I always just love all the sort of collaboration. We've got my husband upstairs, that's Mr. Good Morning Portugal. But Jen L has said, when asked about the zombie streets we see around the world and the poor souls there, I mean, that's something that we've definitely seen increase in recent times. And Carla's also put in generation upon generation of trauma, inability to self-regulate, escapism because people are so disconnected with the soul and no belief of hope. And he's added, how do we turn this around? I'm glad he added that in because I was about to go and cry in the corner. And I think you probably want to keep it quite practical as well. So with this in mind, what can we do to start to realize where we might have grief or where we might be grieving? What do you think might be some of the first steps that could help us?
Yeah, well, I think that thank you for adding those, Carl, those comments. I think the first place to start is awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you brought up that we're grieving, and sometimes we don't even know we're grieving. because what our society, what our culture says is worthy of grief is death of a loved one, which many people have experienced. But
Yeah.
we've all been actually globally, collectively grieving,
Yeah.
which, you know, in our lifetimes, I don't know if we've all done that before globally. And so just naming that that's what it is, the anxiety you may feel, the frustration, the hopelessness, you know, grief from the lifestyle we had
Yeah.
before masks, you know, before all of this, before safety was
Mm.
taken away. You know, it's really been a grieving our safety, just being out in the world, the air we breathe.
Yeah.
So I think first, just naming what you did, Louisa, is that that's what's been happening collectively.
Mm.
And you know, the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle has a nice quote that says, "Awareness is the greatest agent of change." So becoming
Mm.
aware
That's,
of that, right, for our consciousness, and
yeah.
just all of us kind of becoming aware. And I think that's where a lot of the people feel kind of lost and hopeless, is we're not necessarily naming it. You know, there's just
Mm.
so much going on. And of course, we're collectively awakening too, like you
Yeah.
said. You know, we've got this kind of new awakening happening, and this higher vibration, that's energy that's come from the pandemic, where we're getting asked different ways, uh, to be different being in the world now, right? We're
Mm.
being asked to um, tread softly and to join the rhythm of our
Mm.
earth, to become more aware of it, and
Mm.
align with that and embrace our creativity.
Yeah.
But just to back up a little bit, the thing about grief, which, you know, again, in our society is kind of labeled as bad, and you want to get through it and get
Yeah.
over it and get back to your old self, which, you know, you never really get back to your old self, because grief is a maturation process. It's a growth
Mm.
process.
Yeah.
And so the thing about grief is it has that capacity to wake us up. You know,
Mm.
we may be on automatic pilot day to day, and then something happens, usually outside of ourselves, something happens to wake us up. In
Yeah.
this case, it was globally the pandemic, all of us.
Mm.
But it also could be, you know, many people have lost loved ones, been sick themselves,
Mm.
taken care of family members, you know, as
Yeah.
caregivers. So all of that grief has the capacity to wake us up.
Mm.
And if we can engage with it and not try to just get out of it as soon as possible or be distracted by it, which
Yeah.
is the natural feeling because it doesn't feel great,
Mm.
then we grow and
Yeah.
we can learn about ourselves and connect with a part of ourselves that's a deeper part of ourselves that
Yeah.
we don't normally do when life is, you know, going swimmingly and everything's at ease, and you don't have to dig deep necessarily,
Yeah. Yeah,
right? And
I
so,
really hear you in what you're sharing there, Heidi. And so just to make sure I've written it down correctly and got a good handle on it, um, you know, the first thing is awareness, and naming it. So, but that brings me to my, like, another question, because obviously I see that, you know, once you become aware of it and you name it, then it becomes a thing. It becomes something that's on the table, and we know we need to deal with it, or we can deal with it. We can look at it. But how do we become like aware that there is a grief going on? Like, is it a feeling? I mean, I know. Like, I didn't really watch so much Portuguese media about the pandemic when it was going on. I was very sort of much connected into what the news reporters were sharing in the UK, and I'm not sure entirely that people were really feeling their own feelings. You know, the messages were very shocking, very frightening, and
right.
it was almost like feelings were being deliberately elicited in people. And so, how do you know that it's your feeling that you're feeling, and how can you actually name it as grief? You know, because some people, I mean, you're right. I mean, people, the moment they see it, so this is a really long question. The moment people start to feel like they've got grief, they try to get out of it as soon as possible. I agree 100%. And, you know, I spent some time in Bali where I noticed that people celebrated grief. And it was just part of life, life, death. It's all the same thing. And, you know, obviously in the UK and quite probably in the US, people are hidden. You know, people aren't so much seen, you know, as they're going into the latter parts of their time on earth. Whereas here in Portugal, you see old people by the side of the road. Their parents, the people, their family put them outside to get some fresh air, and they're obviously part of life. So how do we know that it's grief we're feeling? What would you say is, I don't know, a characteristic of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're struggling and in a time of uncertainty, maybe increased anxiety, which we've seen, you know, worldwide. Um, I'm not even sure you have to say you're grieving, but if you're feeling uncertain and
Yeah.
struggling, we often act, or you act out of a deeper part of yourself, a more vulnerable part. You're more aware of kind of your senses and thinking about that. And so it's often during those times where we act out of our most authentic self, right? And
Yeah.
so you connect to this authentic self because you're more vulnerable when you're feeling uncertain and struggling.
Yeah.
And so it's acting out of that that can be really beautiful too, where we can almost reframe this feeling of uncertainty and grief as being sacred,
Mm,
because we're connecting with a part of ourselves that's, well, sometimes it's easy to keep it down, keep it hidden,
mm,
you know. And when we're feeling uncertain or struggling, um, some of those little irritations of life that used to seem bigger kind of fall away,
yeah.
right? The bigger stuff becomes important. And so we can actually reframe it, because it's in those moments that we're acting as our most authentic. And we're
Mm,
actually poised in the present as you're feeling that, perfectly between the past, what's happened, and the
mm,
future.
yeah.
So it's in that moment that you can really choose how you want to move forward
Yeah.
instead of just reacting, right? And
Mm,
so it really starts with ourselves. It starts with yourself, you know.
yeah.
And a couple pointers with that would be, first of all, to just pause. You know, the thing, like we said, with grief is you just
Yeah.
want to get out of it as fast as you
Yeah.
can. And that's exactly what you don't want to do.
Mm,
Because if you resist it, that's what causes suffering. When we
yes.
resist our grief and we don't want to see it and we don't want to look at it, we suffer.
Yeah.
You know, like, this is not okay, so I'm not going to do it. And so that's
Yeah.
when that happens. Um,
That
yeah.
really makes sense in such a big way. I just want to quickly welcome Colleen as well. I forgot to give her a good wave. Hey, Colleen, it's really
Hey,
nice to see you
Colleen.
back. And Carl just wants to also say that that was Jen's quote and insight, not his. He was just sharing it. But thank you, Heidi, for addressing you know, his previous quote. So I loved what you were sharing there. You know, so increased anxiety and uncertainty are almost like a marker that we might be in a situation where there's some grief, and it's a time when we might feel more authentic because we're actually more vulnerable. When you said that, I remembered times when I've lost people, not necessarily through death, but maybe like an end of a relationship, or, you know, there are some times when, as I feel it, it's almost like I can hear my heartbeat so much more. You know, all of a sudden, maybe the programs that you have around you, that are your day-to-day reality, maybe they drop. You kind of forget who you
Right.
are for a bit,
True.
because, you know, the world as you know it has now changed, and there are different reference points. I loved what you said, when we resist our grief, we suffer. So is it, I guess, in working with grief, then you're helping people through suffering, you're helping alleviate and find freedom from suffering.
Yeah, freedom from suffering, and in the midst of that, finding meaning. So
Right.
the meaning necessarily doesn't come from getting out of it,
Yeah.
it's in it. So,
Yeah. Love that.
the Saint John of the Cross came up with the coined the phrase many, many years ago, the dark night of the soul. And
Mm.
it's actually in that dark night when we allow ourselves to drop into the grief
Yeah.
and not listen to what society says about it's time to move on, you should be better now,
Yeah.
that the universe, God, whatever your word is for it, kind of does its magic. Like once you can be in it and you connect with that genuine part of yourself, with what's happened to you, whether you've lost a loved one or a breakup or you've
Yeah.
lost your job or whatever. Um, it's engaging with that and being with it and slowing down
Mm.
to let it kind of integrate with who you are. And
Yeah.
one of the gifts of that is wisdom. A hard won gift of grief is becoming wiser and
Yeah.
increased compassion. Like very often with grief, that when I've worked with people who are grieving, have an increased compassion, especially for people going through something similar that you experience. You know how that is,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
You can,
Absolutely.
yeah, you connect with people in this really beautiful way, because you want to help them,
Yeah. Mm.
and you have and so when we resist that grief, you miss out on that invitation
Yeah.
of wisdom, of increased compassion. And that's a sad thing to miss, but it's easy to do because our world is so filled with distraction,
Yeah.
you know? It's easy to be distracted and not go there. But when we do, there are some actual gifts in
Yeah.
grief. So,
What I hear though when you're saying that, Heidi, um, is that by allowing ourselves to be really vulnerable, we are accessing the gifts of like wisdom, increased compassion. What that's saying to me is intimacy. Like all of that
right.
is giving us a much deeper intimacy. And you did mention sacredness earlier, and I didn't quite pick up on it, but intimacy, sacredness, they really start to bring us back alive, don't they? What do you think our
Yeah.
challenges are in terms of finding sacredness and understanding sacredness right now? What would you say our biggest
Yeah.
challenges are, or maybe what are our
All the
greatest
time.
eases in finding it?
Yeah. So I love talking about sacredness. And I really feel like, after years of having the honor, privilege of journeying with people who
Mm,
are dying and being in grief groups with people and companioning with them, you can really see how the sacredness um, becomes front and center.
yeah,
Joan Halifax, the Buddhist teacher, um, says if you want to learn how to live, spend some time with someone who's dying, because
yeah,
what's so important comes, to the forefront. And I would say about sacredness, and this is what I write about in my book, is that even in times of uncertainty, when we feel like the whole world's against us, there are unseen forces, loving, kind forces supporting us and wanting to engage with us. We live in this magical universe that wants to help us and support us. And it's
yeah,
like trying to reach out and give us hints about it,
mm,
and kind of those unexpected coincidences and serendipitous
yeah,
times. And I think in bringing back the sacredness is in the pausing with grief, if we then just really pay attention to our surroundings.
mm,
Uh, when I was in divinity school and my father in law died, my New Testament professor said, be especially aware of God's presence during this time. And you can substitute God for, the universe, whatever works for you. And I didn't really get it at first,
Yeah.
but then I realized that it's so true. Like you can see, have you experienced this when someone you love dies and you see maybe a bird and you're like,
Mm.
oh, these things line up, almost as if they're helping you.
Yeah.
And so it's really being radically aware of your surroundings and
Mm.
noticing what's happening around you. I would say, especially in nature, because nature has just such a transcendent quality. And of course, role models life and death for us. And the other thing about nature is it doesn't discriminate. Nature doesn't care if you're black or
Yeah.
white or red or purple, if you're rich or poor, or it just offers you beauty
Mm.
and, continually. And it's almost like a channel, sacredness, in our surroundings that you tune into. I think we become a little bit numb to really the beauty we're surrounded by. I mean, from what I've seen, Louisa, you live in a magical, beautiful, amazing place. But really, you could live anywhere
Mm.
and you'll see birds, beautiful
Yeah.
birds, or a
Yeah.
tree, or, a flower coming through a crack in a pavement. And it's when we become just like radically noticing our surroundings
Mm.
and tune into that channel that we start seeing it more. It's almost like a muscle that you
Yeah.
practice, right? And then
Yeah, absolutely.
one way to do it, to even get started, is ask for a sign,
Mm.
like put out an intention or, a prayer or whatever, a wish, show me that you're trying to engage with me. And then it's this dance, right? And I think the more we can tune into those rhythms and that natural cycle, the stronger it gets.
Yeah.
And so we can start to operate beneath all the suffering, beneath all the pain, so that we can get stronger and then be available for others. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. I can think in so many ways that that really resonates with us. In fact, Carl upstairs, him who's upstairs listening in, has just said amen to that. I'll just share a little brief story. Actually, we were both having lunch the other day in our front lounge, and we had our patio doors open, and all of a sudden this butterfly flew in. And it flew up the length of the table, and we were quite surprised. We've never really seen a butterfly fly into our house before, and it flew straight out again. And we thought, oh wow, that was a real blessing. This butterfly came in, and then it came in a second time, and we couldn't believe it. And then it left, and then it came in a third time, and then we were like, okay, there is definitely,
Wow.
sometimes life is showing you that there is magic and there's beauty and there's some connection. When you were talking in terms of like the intimacy of connection, when I was, I think, in my early 20s, I had a neighbor who was dying and he had no relatives. And so I visited him every day in the hospice, and we became very, very close. And it was a real honor to, spend so much time with him. And on the day he passed, in the end, the nurses said, look, he really does want to pass now. And I think he's just staying here because you're here. And they said, it's time to leave. And I got
Yeah.
home and I turned the light out, went to bed. And then all of a sudden, I had this real sort of cramping pain in my body. Turned the light on, and all of a sudden the bulb blew. And in my head, I heard out like a light. And then the phone rang, and the ladies confirmed he just passed. And when Carl's father passed, I was at home. He was hoping to get to say goodbye to his dad. And our electricity just kind of off. It just like, so I've got this kind of electricity thing, which isn't quite nature, but it is a force that we
Yeah.
can see. It's like life is connecting. So I love how you're describing this dance of consciousness that we can connect in with, where we sort of go underneath, what
Yeah.
we
Below.
Yeah.
So if
Wow.
we can just drop below, and once you connect with that and you tune into that channel, if you will, and become aware of it, you want to listen to hear what it
Mm,
has to tell you.
mm,
So once you, and it, the thing is, it doesn't take a lot to, just a shift in perspective,
yeah.
right? Like, and just trusting it. And then you want to pay attention.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I know what you mean about that electricity. I was thinking of my son the other day about something, and I looked down, and of course, there's a text from him. That kind of
Yeah.
connection that we can have.
Yeah.
And again, I think the more we can tune in and uh, operate out of that, the stronger that gets.
Yeah.
And so good things will happen, bad things will happen, and we don't have to be happy about the bad things, but
Mm,
we can choose how we respond to them, right?
yeah.
And I mean, it's similar, and I talk about this in Pockets of Grace, is having a gratitude, a gratefulness practice.
Mm,
It gets stronger um, the more grateful we can be for what we do have and not what we're lacking.
yeah.
And yeah, and it's not really happiness that makes us grateful, but it's gratefulness that makes us happy.
I love that.
So that's
Really.
another way, right? With the
Mm,
sacred, and anybody can do. Again, it's free. You can do it. You can start just looking for. Well, they have a practice. In Buddhism for young children where they use their fingers and they think of 10 things a day at the end of the day that they're great. And, they use their fingers. And it could be anything, it could
mm,
be like a really great cookie or, whatever it is. It can be breathing.
yeah.
It can also be a memory. It can be a grateful, happy, or poignant memory that you remember and you're thankful for. So gratefulness isn't just a present time activity. It can be looking back or something in the future that you're, going to do or something. So that's another way is having a gratitude practice and being grateful for what we do have.
Yeah, that's really, really special. I love that very much. I'm guessing that when you first became an end of life chaplain, that I mean, I've never really heard of grief and how to deal with grief, especially from a religious perspective. I've never really heard of it in those kind of spiritual terms, in terms of the sacredness, not so much. And I wonder how this arose within you. Like, did it come from the faith, or did it come from the 20 years of experience and the observation and the feeling of it? But I'm wondering how, your thoughts on the connection, the intimacy, the gratitude. I
Yeah.
wonder how that shaped your professional and also your everyday life. I mean, that must shape your life completely.
Yeah. Well, actually, I write about this in Pockets of Grace because before my father had terminal lung cancer before I
Mhm.
was a chaplain. And that's what started kind of my spiritual awakening and journey. I didn't even know what a chaplain was when he
Yeah.
was in the hospital. Um, but I had this moment when I was driving to see him during his illness one night, just a profound epiphany. And the voice I heard was, You are not alone." And I was going through divorce at the time, and my father was dying, and
Yeah.
I was just completely distraught. And how did my life end up like this? I was 30, and I had just this incredible, profound epiphany and hearing that. And then I looked up because I was driving, um, and in my rear view mirror, I saw the moon,
Hmm.
and it was the biggest, brightest, yellowest full moon I had ever seen in my life, which I hadn't really noticed before then. And I just had this incredible moment of connectedness and
Mm.
belonging, and that I was a part, that you are not alone, that somehow I'm a part of all of this.
Yeah.
And following that were just these magical coincidences and synchronicities, and someone handing me a book that was perfect, or thinking of my best friend and him calling, and then it just unfolded from there, and
Yeah.
in nature again. So that's really, I mean, mine didn't really start from faith. I mean,
Mm.
I didn't go to church. It came out of my direct experience
Right.
of kind of the divine, this universe we live
Mm.
in. And I decided to just follow it.
Yeah.
I was like,
Well,
I think I'm going to keep following this. And
yeah.
here I am in divorce and death, and I was feeling more connected with my world and life
Mm.
than I ever had in my life. And I'm like, this is crazy. But it was so beautiful too. And again, with the connection, as my dad got sicker and sicker, and his ego was stripped away. He was a very type A businessman. As
Mm.
that all got, you know, we just got closer in a way we had never been
Yeah.
before his illness. And that's really what led me to work with dying and
Mm.
grief people. One, to share with people who are grieving, look, there's this other thing that goes on too. But two, if this is where the divine hangs out, I want some of that. So, I wanted to hang around there. And
Yeah.
that's how that started.
I loved how you said you went to divinity school. I mean, I hated school, but I tell you what, if I had gone to divinity school, I'd have showed up every day with an open heart and, with the feeling of joy, because that just sounds so great. I got a couple of questions for you, and then I'd like to ask you a bit about your book, and I know that
Yeah.
your book is just like the prequel for something even bigger. So I also want to ask you about that, but um, I'd like to ask for a bit of practical help, actually. I'm aware of people who are at the end of their life, coming to the end of their life, and they're needing a lot more support, but are refusing the support. What,
Mhm.
having been in a situation like living around somebody who died about sort of 6 months later, who was really asking for support, and then the moment you gave it, it was kind of a bit resentful, and I wonder how we can be in ourselves that we are able to help people come to terms with their own sickening or their own changing. Like you said, your dad's ego was stripped from him, I've been around people who I can see that, like, their life is falling apart and they're really struggling, and you can show as much compassion as you want, but if they're not happy about it, they might not want your take on it. Like, how can you support people that are struggling with coming to terms with their own changes?
Right. Good question. Yeah. And one more thing about my dad, which I find kind of universal, is the one thing he said is, I don't want to lose my dignity. And
Oh, yeah.
so remembering that through
Mm.
the journey, which wasn't that long of a journey, just 3 months, but then, in the hospital working with people at the end of life, and they may be cranky and
Mm.
don't want help, but that usually masks what's underneath that,
Yeah.
which is either deep sadness or fear,
Mm.
usually anger or some version of that is masking something else that's going on. And
Mm.
so, even being aware of that, if you're actually going in to be with this person, um, is not listening so much to their words, but what's the emotion probably underneath.
Mm.
Now, it's not easy always. And so, one thing to do is, if you're physically going to be with this person, is on the drive over or on the way,
Mm.
to do a little mantra, or just centering yourself about what you're heading into,
Mm.
or some protection around yourself, or just kind of getting yourself prepared that it's probably not going to be an easy
Yeah.
visit, and
Mm,
then doing the best you can, but also having boundaries. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to be there all day. You can check in with someone briefly and keep your boundaries,
mm,
um, and leave. But the other thing is, even if you're not physically with the person, is just sending them
yeah.
energetically some love for their helpers to come help,
Yes. Yeah.
right? So you can just ask for that help and guidance of their tribe, their team,
Yeah.
their spiritual team to be helpful. Because sometimes you're like you said, people just are resistant and don't want that help, and who are we to?
Mm. I really find that helpful, actually. Thank you. I mean, I agree. Like, it's their journey, isn't it? And if they want to, however they feel is okay. um,
Right.
and it's up to them to ask for help if they want it or not, and to also have the dignity and to have the space and independence to be able to say, no, I don't want you touching me today. I don't want this.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
it's an interesting one because obviously we've got small children, not so small now, but our youngest is 4, and I'm always very mindful of trying to give them their choice and their autonomy right from the earliest of age that I can. And there is this kind of like moment when it's not really appropriate to listen to them all the time because they actually do need to be kept out of danger.
Right.
And then you've got the same at the other end. Only people have had a whole lifetime of consciousness. um it's really sensitive on the way in and on the way out.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Like, their whole life, there's a reason, maybe why they're crusty or don't want that we don't even
Mm,
know that being brought up to them. Um,
mm,
but it is interesting how almost we become the parent again.
mm.
With, like, if you
Yeah,
say a parent, my mom had advanced Parkinson's, and becoming that parent. So, like you're saying with your young kids, it's almost that parallel
yeah,
world, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one thing I've noticed at both ends, and obviously I haven't spent much time around people that are passing away, but I've spent quite a bit of time around young people that are arriving. But one thing I noticed with both my nan and my friend Tony that I helped when he was coming to the end of his journey is where I was on my own with them, I felt them kind of jump out of their body a couple of times, like
Mm.
etherically or, in a sort of like mediumistic way, almost like they'd already gone. We're trying it out for size. And,
Yeah.
and to me, it doesn't look like there's a real fine line. I know from the medical perspective, there's a really fine line and a very certain line as to when the moment of death occurs. But really, I could see the journey of death is so much more than that like that moment when it actually
Yeah.
happens. And with our newborns, I had these moments where I was talking to them throughout the pregnancy and really feeling them, and then just before they were born, it was like whatever I was communicating with, it was wiped clean. It wasn't like this
Hmm.
divine being of like eons or
Right.
whatever. It felt like I had a very sort of like new baby. But in those first moments, and maybe you remember with your own children, um, they seem to almost pass away. Like when they sleep and then they suddenly come back, it's like they've actually been out of their body and not in it the whole time. It feels again like a very sort of fine line in arriving, even though again the medical establishment would say there's a definite moment when we're born. And yet with each of my children around the age of 3 months or so, there would be this moment where I'd feel they're definitely here now.
Mm.
And I don't know if you've noticed that or felt that, or similar. I don't know. Obviously, we all perceive things differently.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because for me, it was almost the 9 months where I would
Mm.
say, oh, they've been outside longer than they were inside,
Mm.
right? Like, for being
Yeah.
pregnant.
Yeah.
And I have 2 children, and both of them I had, it's not like I thought about it before, but
Yeah.
just at 9 months, there was almost this little grief. I don't know, of, they were safe inside and being pregnant. And it's like, okay, now they've been out in the world longer.
Mm.
And it was almost like they're really out here now.
Yes.
They're
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
alive, you know. So I don't know
Yes.
if that's kind of
No,
similar, but it's the
that
same
that
idea of,
that definitely feels very, very real. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember just, before giving birth thinking, oh, I just want you to come out so I can see you're safe. And of course, the moment they're out, you just want them back inside where you
yeah,
can
like,
protect them.
okay, now you can go back. And it's funny, Lisa, I had that same feeling with my mom, not the womb thing, but like I feel like she was testing out the other side of the veil
Yeah.
before she was like pronounced that she had died. Before
Mm,
she was actively dying,
mm,
I feel like she was, like you were saying, gone and then back, and then
mm.
and just even her, like what she would say was otherworldly in a way.
Yeah.
Like, where did that where were you, kind of thing. So, and being with people at the end of life, I really feel like that's true. Like, whether it's their loved ones they're connecting with and engaging with or not, there's something. I mean, how do we ever really know? But there's
Mm.
some sort of connection there. Like I have a friend who, my friend's mom, the last thing she said when she was dying was, "Oh my God, it's David Gessner, who's my dad."
Yeah.
And, that kind of thing, which hospice workers are used to, this is kind of the norm for them. So it's a whole world we don't know about yet. But again, we're moving into this higher vibration living now.
Mm.
And I think our senses are more finely tuned if we can lean into this um, kind of post-pandemic, maybe it's not post, but what's happening collectively.
Mm.
You know, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
So we don't want to miss the invitation.
I love that. We don't want to miss the invitation. So, in April, then, Heidi, you published Pockets of Grace, Lessons from Darkness, Lessons from Light. Great title, by the way. Is this like a memoir? And also, in terms of when you were talking about we don't want to miss the invitation, what
Right.
could people really get from your book right now? Is it just for people who are going through the process of losing a loved one, or for people who are actually dying at the moment? You know,
Yeah,
who can benefit from
right.
it?
Well, so Pockets of Grace is part memoir. It's certainly my story of my first major grief experience
Mhm.
of my father dying. I was going through a divorce, but it's also, I companion with hundreds of people over the 20 years or so of, my becoming this kind of end of life professional and
Mm.
journeying with people, and the lessons that I learned from them and the lessons that I learned from people who are grieving in grief
Mm.
groups, and sharing that with people. And I think right now it's important because we are collectively grieving, but we're also collectively awakening,
Mm.
to this new um, vibration. And a lot of people, um, most of us, I think, we're not sure how necessarily we want to move forward, but we don't want to go back to the
Yeah.
way it was before. So we're looking for kind of a new way to kind of move forward. We're not really sure what that's going to be, but it's after the pandemic thinking like, how does my life have meaning?
Yeah.
Now that we've been through this, what do I want to do now? And what do I want to leave
Yeah.
when I leave this world? And Pockets of Grace points one way forward from the lessons I learned from, there's some Celtic spirituality, there's lessons from just saints, ancient wisdom from saints, and how they were also people going through a difficult time who role model connecting with a deeper part of themselves that
Yeah.
is open to us as well. And so there are just a lot of different lessons of one way that maybe is a little bit, I don't know if deeper is the right word, but it gives us a rudder in our
Yeah.
sailboat
Yeah.
as we're moving forward. And at the end of each chapter, there are questions for people to kind of reflect on or engage in conversation, or just if you want to think more about it.
Beautiful. That sounds great. And
Okay.
I happen to know that it's part of a much bigger process, isn't it? Because you've also got Indigo Flow. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? It does. Is that, am I
Yeah,
right that pockets of grace can lead on to a much bigger part of the process that you're involved in?
yeah. So I think this was just a natural progression. So I actually stepped out of the hospital as a
Yeah.
chaplain during the pandemic because my
Mhm.
mom had advanced Parkinson's and I needed to care for her. And that's when I wrote the book too, is
Mhm.
it gave me a little bit of space to do that. But from that, I realized, well, I don't think my career's over with grief as
Yeah.
we're in the midst of this pandemic. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like
That's for
pockets
sure,
of
isn't it?
grace, like here I like stepped out in the midst of this pandemic. And so pockets of grace is actually a prequel, if
Mm.
you will, which I
Yeah.
didn't know at the time of. Now it's become a business and a way
Mhm.
to work with people. And my business is Indigo Flow, Path
Mhm.
to a New Beginning. And it takes the lessons from Pockets of Grace and it puts them into programs to work with
Mhm.
people. And one of the things about Indigo Flow is that it asks us to go within, kind of what we've been talking about,
Yeah.
and engage with that grief in different ways. And there are 4 flows in Indigo Flow. So first of all, it's nature,
Mhm.
getting in tune with the rhythms of nature and different ways of doing that. And then there's creativity, like maybe reconnecting with your creativity in ways, or
Mhm.
your imagination. And then the sacred, that
Yeah.
we've been talking about, and maybe rituals to help with that. And then the fourth flow is your soul flow. So
Wow.
how does all this help you align with your deepest desires? And we work together on that, which unveils a path to a new beginning. So you don't
Wow.
discount your grief, but you weave it
Yeah.
into who you're becoming.
Mm. Wow, that sounds really, really powerful, and I can actually see it be really useful for people at any stage in their life, actually, not just when they're going through grief, because it's a change process. I'm reminded of the butterfly that came in a few times
Yeah,
just recently.
right.
Butterflies are all, um, I mean, they go through such a process of trust and vulnerability, don't they? They just know what to do. They allow themselves to get, well, like in their caterpillar form, they become a goo, don't they? Like they melt away.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then their imaginal cells come together and they become these beautiful butterflies. It's such a transformation. This has been really, really beautiful. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. If people wanted to connect with you, Heidi, and learn more about your flows, the work, the workshops, what's the best way? Is it to go onto
Well,
the website?
it's probably going to my website, which is
Uh-huh.
heidigessner.com.
Mhm.
And there you'll
In fact,
find the op.
let let me just,
Yeah,
load it up so
see if
that,
we can pull that up.
yeah, hang on. There we go. That was, quite easy.
Yeah,
So,
and if you scroll down a little bit, you can
yeah.
see the different offerings. And actually, August 10th, I'm going to start Indigo Flow Circle, which
Wow.
they're the different flows that you can like check out the different flows in there.
Mhm,
Um, I'm going to start at something called Indigo Flow Circle, where we'll meet 8 times over 4 months
mhm.
online and learn about these different aspects,
Oh, there's a
transcendent
butterfly.
aspects of grief. There's your butterfly. There's the fourth one. And you'll have worksheets and there'll be a community on Facebook. So that's going to start up August 10th. You can do that on the website. You
Yeah.
can also find Pockets of Grace
Mhm.
on there, and just connect. I'm doing some coaching, some private coaching, and I've got a retreat planned for later in the year. So
Beautiful.
really, again, the book came out, and now this is kind of my focus as well as the book. And I'm hoping to share it with as many people are interested. And as you said,
Wow.
Louisa, this isn't just about grief, but any kind of change or,
Mm. Yeah.
metamorphosis.
In fact, here I can see that if people are interested, you've got a free ebook about the life transforming gifts of grief. Um,
Yes. So the
um,
three kind of secret gifts of grief, which I won't give away right now because
no.
they're in the ebook. But yeah, that is a ebook totally free that can give you some tips as you go through your grief journey.
Yeah,
So
fantastic.
yeah,
And then you can order Pockets of Grace on Amazon as well.
yep,
Lessons from darkness,
absolutely.
lessons from light.
And I'd love to hear from people who have, if you've read the book, my email, Heidi Gessner at Gmail is in the back. And I'd love to hear what resonates with people and kind of what comes up from them. That's been a fun thing that's been happening with the book. So
Oh, that's great. Well, I've seen some of the people's comments, and they're beautiful. The things that people have said to you and shared with you about how your work has been part of their journey. It's really quite remarkable. Real gift.
well, thank you. And I mean, my hope is to provide space for people to be able to do that and share their vulnerability and just kind of feel supported
Yeah.
in that.
Oh,
So,
that's wonderful. Well, I think that's us pretty much wrapped up. But before we go, we've got there's Carl upstairs. He said, "Thank you, Heidi. I really appreciate your calm clarity." And I would
you're
agree.
welcome, Carl.
And I would say it's also very warm as well. And there's this kind of sense of belonging that I really pick up from you, which is really, really nice. It's a real gift. So
Thank
thank
you.
you very, very much for joining me
Thank
today.
you.
I will also say, for those of you that are interested in astrology, Heidi and I are going to be doing a little bit of recording behind the scenes because I want to kind of correlate some of Heidi's journey with her birth chart. Because I am privy to her birth chart. I've seen it, and there's some really beautiful aspects which do correlate with faith, with deep compassion, and also with the grieving process and metamorphosis and things like that. So if you are interested in that, then please do go to Feel Good Astrology on YouTube, and there will be an episode arriving very, very soon. But anyway, wherever you are, thank you so much for joining us today. Heidi, have you got a last word or anything?
Well, I was just going to put a plug in for your, working with you with
Oh,
your astrology because, well,
thank
no,
you.
it's really been affirming for me because you've helped me as I create the business Indigo
Yeah.
Flow from the book, and it's been a very affirming experience,
Oh,
working with you on that. So that's been great. And yeah, I just wish everybody well and to look, pay attention to your surroundings and ask for signs and,
yeah,
to start that conversation,
beautiful.
which our universe wants us to
Yeah,
do. So
I would agree
you're
with
not
that.
alone.
Wow. Well, they are fantastic show-stopping words there. Thank you so much for joining us. Lots of love to you on your
Bye.
journeys, and hopefully we'll all connect in real soon. Bye for now.